Cathy Cress, and welcome to my latest webinar about death and dying. And we are in for a lot of information, so I'm going to try to just jump right in here. I will say, please, as I always say, take notes with any of your questions, and then we will answer the questions at the end. Keith Manensky, who usually does this for me, is going to answer the questions as well as sort of monitor the questions. And Patti Urban, who is the GCM ALCA member, who is also a death doula, is going to answer questions as well. And her presentation is going to be at the end. And that's probably what a lot of people are waiting for. And so let me just jump right into this. And James, could you do the first slide? Okay, so we're going to move to the first slide, the second slide now. Okay, so Atul Gawande, which I'm sure many of you know, tells us that our ultimate goal, after all, is not a good death, but a good life to the very end. And that's a quality of life to the very end. And that's what the goal of a geriatric care manager who's going to work with death and dying needs to really understand, that it's not the medicalization of death. It's not doctors who are in charge. It is family-centered care and patient-centered care. So that makes it a good death. And you can see in this picture with this little girl and her mother or grandmother that that's an example, a perfect example of a good death. So we'll move to the next slide. Okay, so I've said this before, building your business is like building your house. So your contractor, or you directing your contractor, is going to frame your house, but you building your business are going to frame it with your care management skills, where, you know, however you came to this this practice, you know, how you learn to be a care manager. So that's where we start. That's framing. That house is framed. So then you want to put walls in the house, and you do that with several things. A is an operations manual that, you know, is your guide, tells you what to do when, and you can train people through, and you can sell your business for double the price if you have one. And your business plan, and your products. And we like to say services in geriatric care management or ALCA, but I look at them as products, and they're products that take away pain of the care provider and of the client. And then you want to wire the house, and you don't wire it with you do kind of, it's not electricity, you're going to wire it with technology. But then you're going to add rooms to the house, and the rooms are products, and they're what we're adding now. And so we're going to add the room of end-of-life care management here, but it's in your menu of services, any of those services you list, they're products and they're rooms. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so what role does the geriatric care manager play in death and dying? It's basically, it's navigation. My dad was a navigator in World War II. So it's the moving gear. It's the gear that really can, you know, that manipulates how the car runs, if you think of it that way. And so the role that you play in death and dying is to move the family and the client through the continuum of care, as you do whenever you have a client and a family. You move them through the continuum of care to get the right services at the right time, at the right place, at the right price. Okay, but death and dying has its own right services, place, etc. So you're going to get the services they need in death and dying, like palliative care, like hospice, like the death doula, like the medical equipment, because they need, all of these services, and they're in your continuum of care. Probably you didn't know too much about a death doula before, but she or he is out there in the continuum of care too. And then you're going to educate and that's what we do all the time. We educate our clients about, the whole aging process, which a lot of them, it's not taught very well. And you educate the services, you teach them what palliative care is, and when with the right stage you use it in, and then you assess for things like cultural diversity. And I'm going to talk a lot about that, but to a Vietnamese, death and death rituals are very different than the few that we have here in the United States. We are not a death-centered culture. And so you have to figure out the cultural background, the food, the rituals that are around death. And then you want to advocate for, and this is really important, it's central, person-centered care. Instead of disease-centered care, we're looking for person-centered care. And that's what Atul Gawande really, really talks about, he being a doctor, that we want to get away from the medicalization of death. And then we want family-centered care. And I'm going to talk more about that, but that's basically combining the needs of the client, the needs of the family, and the needs of the healthcare system that serve them, and serving them all together as a system. And that's systems theory, which really, is very true in the aging family. And last, you're going to do these routine care management tasks. You're going to do assessment, you know how to do that, create a care plan. You're going to go out and monitor on a regular basis. And you're going to look at new things like, well, not new, caregiver burdens in, every service and every time we, encounter a client. But we're going to talk about, anticipatory grief, how you deal with that, and even, the threat of suicide, because caregivers can really get to that point. So we'll move to the next slide. Okay, I'm just going to give you a really fast start of somebody that I worked with, and this is an amalgamation. This is Nellie Caremuch, and she started a care management business with saying she just did assessment and care planning. Well, as I always say, a very desperate caregiver who's calling you when you say, oh, what I'm going to give you is an assessment. They don't know what an assessment is. It doesn't sound like anything is going to take their pain away. What you need to give them are services and products, and the ones they're looking for that they know are going to staunch the pain. So she was attracting very few clients, and she saw that the clients had specific needs, like moving, and that might be a service called Move Management. Caregiver burnout, it might be a service like caregiver assessment. Discharge from the hospital, a service like home from the hospital. And so she wanted to add these products, but she was really afraid of death and dying, and palliative care and hospice. And so I worked with her, and we'll go to the next slide. And I added to her services, I gave her multiple products, including death and dying. I taught her all the steps to serve death and dying clients through the progression of the 5 stages of death, and we're going to talk about that. I showed her that she was the key to introduce hospice and palliative care, because many clients don't know about it, and if they do, they're terrified of it because they think it means that they're going to die instantly. And hospice, the average person goes to hospice in the last 15 days. That's crazy. You as a care manager can bring them in much earlier at the right time, the right place. I showed her how to contact a death doula, which Patty's going to show us today. And I assured her that hospice loves care managers. They love to work with care managers. And they were open to her. And so she knew then how to assess, advocate, and solve problems in all the stages of deaths. And she had 100 inquiries over the next 3 months. So she made a profit, and that's what you too can do. So we'll move to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to do this really fast. Why can I teach you this? I'm the author of the Handbook of Geriatric Care Management with a lot of other great care managers who are now all retired like me. And I am also the author of Care Managers Working with the Aging Family, which is it is the technical text, it is the clinical text, and the whole chapter and the whole way to do death and dying is right in there. And that book is really golden for you. I'm also wrote a book called On Midlife Siblings, because you're dealing with the family, and the worst offenders in the family are the siblings. And I also wrote the only operations manual in the field. So we'll move on. Okay, this is the agenda. We're going to go through transitioning the patient and the family through the 5 stages of death. We're going to talk about how to help the client be an active participant in their care. Client-centered care, to give the family and the caregiver tools to manage the care, because people don't plan ahead for this. They didn't go to death and dying school. They don't know how to do it. And they were terrified to even learn about it. So you've got to teach them, and then provide family-centered care to the caregiver and the family. Choose the right support services through all the stages of death. That's really key. And introduce hospice and palliative care, and learn how to work with them as a team, and use the ALCA end of life information. And I'm going to give you some information about that, and an interview. The grand finale is going to be Patti Urban, who is a death doula and an experienced GCM. So we'll move to the next slide. Okay, the transition of the patient and family through those 5 stages of death is like this boat, and this boat is going out into the ocean, and it's going to have some big waves. And what you are doing is navigating through all the stages of death, helping the family and the person who is dying through those big waves so that they can get to the end of their journey. And so we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, what is your job? Okay, the care manager's job, there's, as I said, 5 stages, but we're going to start with an extra one, which is sort of an overview. The care manager's job before the diagnosis. Well, what's that? The person starts to notice symptoms like blood in their urine, blood in their stool, lumps in their body, and they're starting to be worried. And they schedule an appointment with a doctor. And your job is to help the family ask questions, because there's only 10 minutes available in medicine right now to really see a doctor, as you well know. So you've got to be able to, the ideal is to take them yourself. And I hope a lot of care managers do that. But if the family wants to do, you're going to have to train the family to utilize those 10 minutes to be able to, listen to the doctor, get the whatever diagnosis he's giving or she's giving, get the medication, the prescription, go pick up the meds, and then take them home and put them somewhere where they're not under the dog food. And that is a really important task. And so if you can't do it, if the family wants to do it, you're going to have to train them. And then you're going to have to, create right now an up-to-date care plan and a med list to start off with, and organize documents. The POA and the DNR are really, really important here. And all the financial information, where your money is in your bank, multiple bank accounts, because you need to know that at end of life. And in Care Managers Working with the Aging Family, in that chapter, there's a whole list of all the documents you need. And then go to medical appointments. I already mentioned this. Make a list of questions. And this is really important. Set up a personal health record. And how you figure that out is what the health tech, the tech literacy of the family and the health literacy of the family. Do they need just a notebook and a pen? If that's, you know, that they're not tech literate, that's just fine. Or do they, you know, they have tech skills. And so you can go online right now and Google personal health records, and you'll come up with a zillion great suggestions. And so you gauge that, but you want them to be able to keep track of everything the doctors, nurses, PTs, OTs, anybody said, and what, you know, was the end of the meeting, what were they telling you? In other words, you know, to be kind of a scribe, but keep records so that you can keep asking more intelligent questions. And we'll move on. Okay, the care manager's job in the acute phase. Well, the acute phase is really, it's a time, it's the beginning of, after the diagnosis and the results of the treatment, it's really the beginning of that. And patients often and clients often are completely shut down. They're in shock because they've just been told that this is a terminal illness. And yesterday, when, you know, so many people were killed in my state, California, in Monterey Park, which was one of the killings, the key representative who lives out there got on the, you know, she was a talking head, and she said a lot of the families are in total shock. You know, they can't even grasp what's going on, and that's a reaction to death. And so it's very hard to communicate with these people at this point. So you have to find other people in the family that you can go through to give information to until the family members who are in this shock, literally numbness, and come out. Because the family and the patient need time to digest at this point. And they're beginning to struggle with side effects. And I'd highly recommend, there's a movie called Pieces of April. You may have heard the music from it. Early Katie Holmes film. And Patricia Clarkson, one of my favorite actresses, is a woman who is dying of cancer, and she's the mom. And so she's traveling down from northern New York to New York City, where Katie Holmes, who is living in the East Village, with and the family thinks she's like a bad person. She's going to make Thanksgiving dinner. My point is that Patricia Clarkson is throwing up all the way down the New York freeway because she is dealing with the symptoms of, you know, chemotherapy. And she's in restaurants throwing up. She's going, you know, getting out of the car where they have to stop. And my point is that through all of these symptoms, life goes on, and the patient, you know, moves on through life. And you've got to be there to really help them through this stage. And they're confronting all these losses. Women, when they start losing their hair, like I'm older, everybody starts losing their hair at that point. But when you lose all your hair, that's a tragic loss. When you lose your appetite, you can't even eat because you're so sick. When you're so sick and you can't get out of bed, and, you know, the basic ADLs are really hard. It's just a compilation of loss. And so this is a really difficult stage, and you need to help the family through that by, you know, being able to help them in many, many ways. Move on. We're going to move on to the next slide. And now we're going to go into the chronic stage, and this is the stage where this is probably the hardest stage. It's the longest stage. It can be years or it can be days. And this is the period of time from the diagnosis to the end of the results of the treatment. And your job is to help coordinate through the continuum of care with the care providers, family care providers, support groups, respite, you know, because they want to be just family, but they're mostly, in most cases, the family or the care providers. And, you know, that's a very difficult job. You want to educate the healthcare staff in disease management, and the healthcare staff is the family. And, again, this is health literacy. A lot of people learn different ways. So how can you tell them about how can you tell the family about what they're going to do? You need to get videos if people learn through videos, or brochures if they learn through words, essentially. And where you get that, and really in teaching them about the disease the person is dying of or threatening to die of, really can come from your disease or organizations like the American Cancer Society or the Alzheimer's Society, the American Heart Society. It should be in your hospital's library, but they don't often have libraries. So if they have a library, you could get all this information from there. But you always tap into these great disease associations to educate. You're educating the family. And then you want to monitor anticipatory grief. I'm going to go through that more, but anticipatory grief is the same grief that happens afterwards. But if you start to go through it at an earlier stage, it's much easier when the person dies, because you've already gone through a lot of it. And then monitor caregiver burden. Are the family caregivers burn out? And either you can give them tools for relief or bring in private care providers. And you've got to, really monitor the family, knowing what you're going to do, and then arrange home care, and then set up family meetings. Because when you go through all the stages of dying, anger is a really big part of those stages. And the family themselves can be angry at the dying person. That sounds bizarre, but if the parent has, funded all the private education and the college education of the grandchildren, and they're not going to be there anymore, the children can be angry. And, the client can be angry at God. A lot of people say, how could there be a God if this is happening? So you've got to really, set up family meetings one-to-one with, the individuals who are having the difficulty. Or if it's a family conflict, then, you want to set up a large family meeting. And you have to have these skills to be able to facilitate a meeting, or, call in a facilitator, or you can, learn to do it yourself. And actually, in the Handbook of Geriatric Care Management, there's a whole agenda for a family meeting and how you do it. And it's a skill that every care manager should have anyway. And then you want to check the docs, keep on checking all the time. Are those documents signed, like the POA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure they're always coming in. And we'll move to the next slide. This is the acceptance phase. And this is a time after all the medical procedures have done, the chemotherapy's over, the radiation, et cetera, and it hasn't worked. And so this takes the ability on the patient's part to accept and deal with the struggles of their illness and their coming death. And this is a good phase, but a hard phase as well. And many times what the client who's dying feels, that they want to make things right, that they want to forgive someone that maybe they're not talking to forever, or ask for forgiveness from a family member or a friend. And they secondly want to make peace with the inevitable. So your job is to help them through that. And at the same time, keep on monitoring the response to the treatment. The treatment's not really there, but pain relief is, and that's really important. And monitor the family's ability to accept and deal with his diagnosis. So thus knowing really about individual family meetings, or bringing MFTs or LCSWs in your community on a one-to-one basis. And, or hospice can do this too. and monitor the client's ability, as I said, to accept and deal with the diagnosis, and if not, do one-to-one, meetings with them, and monitor comfort and pain. And at this point, you really should have hospice in there. And, of course, it's the client's choice. But, so much can be done through hospice that it's a really, really good idea to convince the family to bring hospice in. And you should be bringing in palliative care if they're not already involved. So this really takes, an understanding of what belongs where, when. And, midwives and, death doulas are sort of the midwives of death. There's a rhythm to birth, and they know, by the sounds of the mother, really, when this needs to be done. And you have to get a feel for death and, when it's right to introduce something like hospice, which is scary to most people, and palliative care. So we'll move on. So the terminal phase, this is the end. Any time between the diagnosis and the final decline. And the thing is, there's no cure, and death is imminent, and the patient and the family face death and face comfort and pain. They need comfort, they don't need pain. And then religious concerns. And we'll move to the next slide. So this is your job in that last phase. You want to monitor anticipatory grief. I'm going to talk more about that, but I just, talked a little. You want to communicate that this is the end and it's time to say goodbye to the family. So if people are going to come from far away, they need to come now. And it's really important to assess the spiritual needs and contact the appropriate religious spiritual counselors, if there are ones, and encourage families to say the 4 things that matter the most. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. And, they're big tasks. They're very, very big tasks. So I'm going to explain a lot more about them now. We'll move on. And anticipatory grief, I've talked a lot about that, but it's normal mourning that occurs when patient and family are expecting death. But you're doing it, the patient often can do it ahead of time because it's so difficult to be a care provider with someone you love and accept that they're dying. I have a friend whose husband was dying of Parkinson's, and he said, I just want to be here in the here and now. I really don't want to talk about all these symptoms. And so she had to go cry in the shower. It was the only place where she could really grieve, where she wasn't around and was upsetting him. And so at that point, there were many symptoms that have occurred, and it includes all the things that you really think about with anticipatory grief, all the thinking, feeling, cultural, and social reactions to that expected death are felt by the patient and the family. And it gives the family time to grieve slowly ahead of time so that it's not a bombshell grief when the person dies. And you have to expect that the grief is happening all the way along, all these progressions of death, and be able to recognize anticipatory grief as a care manager, and be able to, communicate with the client, about it. How are they feeling? What supports could you give them? Do they need outside counseling? Do they need respite? What do they need to get through this early grief? Because it's a really good thing to go through so that it's not hit you really hard at the end. And we'll move to the next slide. Okay, your GCM tasks in cultural assessment and death and dying. And I mentioned this before, this is really important. You have to assess acculturation. Usually first generation immigrants who come to the United States, they they hang with their old traditions, their old rituals. And then, as people become acculturated, they move toward actually the lesser culture acculturation and rituals that we have in the American culture. But you want to look at language. Do they need information brochures written in their own language? And it could be regional. Lots of big countries like China. China has lots of regions with different ways to do everything, including death. And really look at, do they take, the American way of death, which is pharma and medicines, or is there cultural healing? Like, you can look at Chinese medicine in many ways. You can look at it as cultural healing, even though it's been around for 500 years. Disclosure and non-disclosure. There are many cultures who do not like bad news, and bad news meaning that you don't tell the dying person that they are dying, because they feel that that really affects their dying in a kind of religious cultural way. So you have to know, the culture that they come from, and, is bad news something, that tells you that, the family really doesn't want you to tell them about dying, or they are dying. And that's disclosure, non-disclosure. It's the same thing. And then again, get the cultural material and the family language, assess arrangements for after the death, and really just ask. I mean, you can there's a cultural assessment in Handbook of Geriatric Care Management. There's a whole chapter on it. But you can, just ask point blank, what are the cultural rituals in their death? And usually the family will tell you. And then assess for the arrangements in the death, the kind of death that culture really, wants for you. Like, I mean, in an easy way, Jews by culture, they bury their loved ones right away. Where, in the Christian cultures, you wait a while. There's not a lot of rules in the Christian cultures, I don't think. So you have to figure this out. And the next slide. Assess the quality of life to create a good life to the very end. And again, this is Atul Gawande. And this is really important. And quality of life is a really, really important, new, interesting development in geriatric care management. And it's not looking at the client for the kind of care they need for their body, which is mostly what we do today. It's looking at the client and figuring out, where is their joy? Where at their level of care, whatever it is, how can they do things that they used to love to do at this level of care? And the same really is true of death and dying, because you can do a quality of life assessment. A lot of us have those. There's a whole chapter in the Handbook of Geriatric Care Management that Nina Herndon wrote. She's sort of the godmother of quality of life. And it's a test to find out, what do you love to do? And it's broken down into 4 categories, but one of them is intellectual. So, you can go to the library and get the books and the movies and the documentaries and the games that people want to play, and they can do that while they're dying. I mean, I love to stream at the end of the night, because I want to go to sleep happy. I really do. And so, death is the same thing. I mean, it gives you this sense of, displaced reality. And emotional is another part of quality of life. And that means bringing the family around, if the client wants. I mean, you remember, they have the choice, but do they want family visiting, friends visiting? Who do they want visiting? Don't bring people, don't allow people coming, or, the family allows them, but you have to talk to them about that. And emotional is really important. And then physical, I mean, people can be doing exercises, if you get them, say from the doctor orders PT, that can be done comfortably with, a lot of different treatments. So you want quality of life in the good life to the very end. And we'll move on to the next slide. And then assessing for spirituality. This is really important. You can do a spiritual assessment, and there's a spiritual assessment in the Handbook of Geriatric Care and Management in this spiritual chapter. However, you can just come out point blank and ask them, what religion do they follow? And I'm going to talk right now about Leonie Nowowitz, who has been a great teacher to me over the years. And she specializes in geriatric care management and spirituality. And this is what she told me years ago. Spirituality is really, what's this all about? At the end of life, what does it mean? Am I going to go to hell? Am I going to go to heaven? I'm never coming back. I'm just a star now, or like I don't even rate a star. What is this all about? And when older people come to the end of their life, they question this. What Leonie says, there isn't just this question, because that's spirituality. Then you turn to religion. What's religion? It's file cabinets. And the file cabinets are, the various answers. So the Catholics have a file drawer that says, this is the answer. This is what happens at the end of life. The Protestants have another one. The Jews have another one. The Muslims have another one. The atheists have another one. And the environment is actually, spirituality for a lot of people, especially now. And they have their own answer. So, essentially, you want to find out, what sort of spirituality and religion do they follow, and then you can consult with the religious leaders or professionals that work with whatever filing drawer that they're following, and interpret their beliefs and rituals and bring them in. And then again, with clients, individuals having, power over their own decisions, ask them, do you want prayers as you're dying? Do you want hymns if you're dying? Exactly what do you want? Do you want parish nurses to come by? The rabbi already talked about the priest, the imam, the pastor. Do you want church members to visit? Do you want communication at home? And I have a whole form in my manual, which is what is the quality of life when you die? Because hospice didn't really have it. And what do you want when you die? You don't want certain people there that you're still not talking to. A lot of people have really strong feelings, so they're waiting for that one person they didn't talk to come so that they can ask forgiveness. And we'll move to the next slide. And the task for you at this point, you want to determine what matters to patients, what patients want from their physicians. And obviously they want choice. They don't want the doctor to be in charge, which is the way it always was. They want choice. They want the choice to be able to die at home. That's the big one. They want choice to die in the hospital. Some people do. And they want transparency. When my mother was dying of lung cancer, and this was in the 60s, doctors didn't even refer to cancer as cancer. They said it was the big C. Now that's the ultimate in lack of transparency. Patients really often want to know the truth. I just talked about a culture that does not want bad news, but mostly in American culture, we want transparency. And they want to control their own care. They want to make choices about it and control, what they need to do at the end. Forgiveness. They want people that are, interacting with them in an empathetic way. And your job is to ask empathetic questions and no interference in their decisions. And then you want to advocate across the barrier to the patient to patient-centered care, which I talked about earlier. Not disease-centered care, and family meetings and meetings with physician as well. The physician can be brought in, but you have to be very, very tender about this. If you have hospice involved, hospice usually has someone that will, you know, can mediate a family meeting with a doctor and really handle them, because doctors think they're care managers, which they're not. And we can move on to the next slide. Help the client to be an active participant in their care. You know, again, you want patient-centered care. You want the care not to be controlled by the family, but the family does need care on its own, and you want the care to be integrated as best possible. And you don't want, as I've said a zillion times, the medical way of death. You want patient-centered care that contrasts with disease-centered care. And you want the patient to be able to make, if they can do that, almost all the treatment decisions. If not, then you have the POA. And then based largely on what doctors do is they base everything largely on their clinical experience and data from various medical tests. They can put their 2 cents in, but really in the end, it's for the patient to make their own decisions. And you have to be the midwife to that. And we'll move on. And the care manager's job is to navigate through all the reactions in the terminal illness. So this is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stage. And you really have to get through denial. And denial is just a way to not face what's really happening, but you have to deal with it. And it's a very normal reaction that people have when they learn that they have a terminal diagnosis. Anger, I talked about that earlier. Anger is really normal. It's good, really, because they've got to get that out of their system, the patient. And so how to deal with anger, and they'll start to bargain, you know, or actually the family starts to bargain in many ways. Well, they do too. I won't smoke or drink if you let me, if you let me live here, God. I'll never go out with another woman behind my wife or something like that. And then the family does bargaining too. It's a very normal stage, and you have to learn how to deal with that. Depression, which is true of all older people at all times, but you know, there is extreme depression in losing life. So you have to have skills in knowing how to work with the depression with a client. And then acceptance, because they can't do the acceptance really on their own. You're there as the navigator. You're not there as the decision maker, but you're there as the navigator. And we'll move on. And then the care manager's job in family-centered care. I learned this from Bunny Dibness, who is a great friend and a brilliant geriatric care manager and mediator, if you're looking for one. She's great. And she taught me about the whole family approach. And this is the care focused on the patient and the family. And this is something a care manager we should be using at all times. This is called family systems. And, you know, what happens literally, if you change one thing in a family, the whole family will switch. They will make it, the family is a unit. And so you want to have a whole family approach, and working with the patient and the family to choose the right services at the right stage. And that's really important. Helping them enhance self-efficacy. And this means that the care providers, you have to build confidence in them. They're usually highly intimidated by, you know, the doctors. And, you know, they're afraid of their ability to render care. I had an incident with a family member, my daughter-in-law's father was dying, and his mother and the wife, her mother and the 2 sisters called me, and the dad was in the hospital, and they didn't think he should be there anymore. They wanted him home to die. And they kept saying, we'll wait for the doctors to tell us what to do. And it was really hard for me to say, could you just listen to one suggestion? You can tell the doctors what to do. And it was revelatory to them. They thought about it. They're really smart people. And lo and behold, they did it. They called the doctors. They said, and of course, the husband wanted out of there. He came home and he died quite soon, but he died at home in the arms of his family. And so you have to teach the family that they have the power to do this. And we'll move on to the next slide. And provide, again, the family-centered care has to do with really, dealing with caregiver burden, again, bringing in private home care, getting them into respite, or bringing respite in for them, all the tools that you already have. And then we've talked about anger and caregiver burden, understand how to deal with caregiver stress, because this is the ultimate in stress with death and dying in a family. Anxiety, because everyone's nervous, because just what I talked about, they don't feel like they have the power to talk to the doctors, or they know more than they do. And you've got to really reassure them, yes, you do. You can tell the doctor you want to go home, and bring this right services in at the right time and the right level of caregiver needs, and measure the caregiver assessment. And caregiver assessments are in the Handbook of Geriatric Care Management, and you should be using them, constantly through death and dying. But, in most cases, is the caregiver really, does the caregiver have the ability to render this care? Are they too stressed out? Are they too old? I mean, lots of times you have spouses caring for another spouse. Can they give needles? Can they lift? All those things a caregiver assessment is going to teach you. And move to the next slide. And then introduce hospice. We talked about that. They focus on relieving symptoms and supporting patients with life expectancy who have months, not years, to live. And usually you have to have 2 doctors say that they only have 6 months to live. Hospice has changed radically. If you've read the national articles that are kind of scathing about hospice as it is now, that's why I say pick the good hospices. Patti, who can talk for herself, says try the nonprofits. But you want to, basically, know a really good hospice, and that's, what their job is. Palliative care is different, that you don't have to have a dying diagnosis. It's for pain and symptoms. And so, anybody, with pain and symptoms can come into palliative care, and you usually use it earlier than hospice. But again, you've got to be like a midwife to life, to babies, and, just see when is the right time to bring these things in. But they're very different, and we'll move to the next slide. And so palliative care, it's comfort care. It focuses on pain and symptoms, but just not just dying. And it can be started in any part of the disease. And it adds support and emotional and psychological, spiritual. And lots of times palliative care is a bridge to hospice, or going home and getting out of the hospital. And I've used it in that way too, just to get a leg in to the doctors to get the person out of the hospital. And we'll move on to the next slide. And, I really went over this, what hospice does. And you can read it. I'm going to send this to you afterwards. But hospice it's a team-oriented approach. They have they have a doctor. Usually they'll have a nurse, they'll have a social worker, which is always confusing because you usually have one too, and the hospital had one too, and what the hell? The patient is very confused. And they all too manage pain and some symptoms, but for dying patients. And we'll move to the next slide. And your role is with hospice is to bring them in at the right stage. And you got to learn to work with a hospice team, and they want you to be part of the team because they really do know you. And so really marketing that to them is really important. And, they do have a doctor that will come in and look at medical situations, but they're not there to cure, and they don't want people going back to the hospital. But they communicate with the medical staff in the hospital and families and make sure they order the durable medical equipment, but usually there's a glitch with some of the equipment, the mattress didn't work, et cetera, and then you follow up. And one thing that Patti pointed out to me with hospice is hospice comes in and they supposedly train the family, they train them in being the caregivers, but that's it. And so you are really the main impetus to keep the family learning and learning, there was no book. They didn't expect to be able to be a care provider. They're not a doctor, not a nurse. So you've got to, support all of the information that hospice gave them once and really support them in being able to, carry out the sometimes arduous jobs of being a care provider. And we'll move on. And your role, again, I'm going to, skip over a lot of this. You provide support for the clients and the families. I've talked about that to death. Arrange transportation for treatments to the doctor's visits. That's your job. Help hire and manage the caregivers, because hospice isn't there to do that at all. So that's a really good thing that hospice loves you about. You can do that. And then explain what hospice is doing to family members, and collaborate with a client, family, hospice social worker to see that all the needs are met. Because by that point, hospice is there. It's a cast of millions. You have the family, there's a bunch of them usually, and then you have hospice, and then you have your team. And, it's just a lot of people, and you're the, sort of like the head of the circus. And so you really have to be able to, keep everything going without groups running into groups, and, the death being even worse because there were too many people doing too many repeated things. Move on. Okay, so right here, you can't see the link, but when you get this, you're going to be able to click on the journal. This is what Aging Life can really give you. It has a journal of aging life, and Gwen Harris, who might be in this webinar, I think she is. She is the queen of all this. She wrote an entire journal on end of life. And you can get that out of Alka. So you're just going to click on that, and it shows you where to get Gwen's information. And Gwen was my student in the first year I was teaching in San Francisco State. And she said, "Oh, I'm going to be a death care manager." And I was like, "Oh my God." But the students had such great ideas, and she went on to do that, and continues to do it to this day. And then Gwen wrote Care Managers Working with the Aging Family, Dying, Grief, and Burial, in Care Managers Working with the Aging Family with another one of my students, Diane Levan. And when you click on this, you'll find out how to get that. We're coming to the end. We can move on to the next slide. And the resources that I have available, the GCM Operations Manual class covers death and dying. It has 6 modules covering each stage of end of life, and there's an overview. And the 5 stages of death, it has lectures, PowerPoints, templates, marketing abilities, and homework, an individual hour of consulting with me every 2 weeks about your business. And the Geriatric Care Management Operations Manual has this too, but there's not a class involved in it, and you can get that manual separately. And we'll move on. Okay, this is the point. We're almost at Patti. And this is the point where I make special offers to everyone, and this is going to go fast. So the first one offer is the GCM Operations Manual. It's now out in its 5th edition and it has 15 products in it. You can click on one of those links and find out what they are, the 15 services. It's step-by-step how to deliver each service. So that's why it's a training manual. You can train your staff through it. It has a separate forms manual. Then they're both electronic, so they're intertwined. And there's a PDF so that you can edit and make it your own. You know, if you don't like what I said, move it around. And you can effortlessly onboard and train new employees because that's what it is, a training manual. Normally it's $650, but for webinar, I always make offers. You can get it for $550. And if you're an ALCA member, you can get it for $100 less. Or you can get this through a subscription and it's $70 a month for 11 months. Or PayPal has, and Tasha Bouchamp, we're really good friends, told me about this. PayPal now has this credit program. Tasha uses it and they will lend you the money to, you know, purchase anything, including Tasha's or my packages, and it's interest-free. That's a fabulous deal. So I would really look into that. And the regular price for the operations manual class is, you know, it's $650. And but it can be, you know, there's $100 discount. Excuse me, $550, and then there's a $100 discount. So that's pretty cheap. And you can find out more on my website. You can't go on the website and order these because I've got reduced prices. So you really just have to email me if you want to do that. And then we'll move to the next slide. We're almost over. I have a GCM operations. This is the business class, and this is for startup or restart up. People that just want to begin to start or start again a geriatric care management business. So it's a self-paced course. You have a year to complete it, but I will let you go a little longer or more if you're really trying to work away at it. It has the manuals for free like the rest do. It includes 2 electronic PDFs so you can edit and make it your own. And 22 modules, 20 hours of consulting, and oh, I'm sorry, I'm saying the wrong thing. This is a GCM care management operations classes. I didn't think that looked right. Okay, so this class has 22 modules, and it comes with 57 free CEUs from ALCA that NACM and ALCA gave me. So you can get CEUs for free in very easy little tests. It has 22 modules to deliver 15 products, because death and dying is actually 6 different modules, and home from the hospital is 3. You get 20 hours of free consultation about your business from me. You meet with me twice a month because you've got to work on the side. I give you marketing with each product. And I teach you how to market it, not only deliver it. You have free tech support. And this is all available between today and February 7th. It is $950. You can have it for $850, but if you belong to ALCA, you can have it for $750. Or you can take the subscription plan or use PayPal credit. And I do use PayPal, but I'm not trying to advertise them. Tasha told me this is great, and so I'm believing her. And we'll move to the next slide. And this is the business class, sorry. And this is for people that are just starting out to GCM business. It includes the operations manuals for free. It's a self-paced course with 1 year to complete. It has 10 modules as opposed to 22. And 10 hours of free consultation with me about your business, one-to-one coaching, free tech support, a closed Facebook group. And all of our students now meet on their own, either through Canvas, the platform that we use for the class, or on Facebook. And so they meet alone, you know, talking. It's just like a regular classroom. And I do chat rooms once a month as well. And again, the monthly subscription is $80. It's usually $8.50, $7.50 for the manual, and then $100 off if you're an ALCA member. And you again need to email me if you're interested in this, because it doesn't, the price isn't the same. And we'll move on to the next slide. And this is the last thing I'm going to talk about. This is a whole new product that I put together, and it's a speakers bureau. It's been out for a little bit. And this is a complete package to market to adult children. And they're the hardest people to find. You can't, Google adult children in Philadelphia. It just doesn't come up. And so you can find them through a speakers bureau, because tons and tons of people, usually 60, 50, 60, 40, 50, 60 belong to clubs. And you can use them to speak to women's clubs. Women's clubs are a great way, and women's clubs are still around. I was surprised too. About issues in aging, which women are really interested in the fraternal clubs, especially Rotary, Lions. They're always looking for great speakers, and again, they're made of adult children. And the music societies, because older people tend to, like me, I still like classical music. What were you listening to in the beginning? It wasn't rock and roll. Although I like rock and roll. So long story short, you could speak to those. And I have a whole list of national ways to get a hold of all these clubs in your area, so you don't have to worry about it. And then I have 7 pre-made speeches with a PowerPoint, and they're all listed over here, and all the steps to prepare the speeches ahead of time, what to do before you begin to speak, and then after you speak, there's lots of steps you need to take to follow up, like capture all the emails. And the complete package with sell sheets. I also give you sell sheets, which is a great thing to leave with people, describing how they can get in touch with you, and then giving them pieces of the presentation. It's $195. It's a great deal. And you get a 30-minute consultation with me to help you put it together. So we are almost done and getting to Patti. We can move on. And here she is. Yes. This is Patti Urban, and I was just so lucky to find her. I knew a little about her being a death doula because she works with me as a client. But I live in Santa Cruz, and there are a ton of death doulas in Santa Cruz. We are a weird community, but being a death doula is not weird anymore, because all I had to do was launch this, and the next day the Washington Post did a huge story about it. And I thought, oh my God, we're on. So Patti is, I interviewed her, and James is now going to run the interview, and then Patti will be answering questions. Oh, good morning, Patti. And I am really excited about interviewing you. And I want to tell the audience that Patti is the owner of Aging Care Planning Solutions, and it's in New Haven, Connecticut. And she's been a death doula for many, many years. But on top of that, she is a member of ALCA and a geriatric care manager. We might add that. So Patti and I are today going to just, she's going to answer questions and I'm going to ask them. And we're going to start finding out exactly what is a death doula. So, Patti, what is a death doula?
Okay, well, first of all, the word doula, it's a Greek word that means woman who helps. Basically, it's very simple. And they provide emotional support and counseling. What a death doula does is, as opposed to what a hospice nurse does, a hospice nurse is a medical professional trained in end of life care. What a death doula is a non-medical professional trained in end of life care. So that's the difference.
I had no idea. That's really interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's all non-medical.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. When and that was one of the reasons that I contacted you, is that there's many death doulas in Santa Cruz where I live. And it's also the home of a lot of birth doulas.
Mhm.
So you
Yes.
can see they're not nurses, they're, okay, all right.
Exactly. So anybody can be a death doula with the proper training.
Oh, okay, great.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so now that we know what a death doula is, what do they do? If you could pick, have a job description.
Well, what I do as a death doula is I give emotional support to not only the patient who is coming up on the end of their life, but also to their family and loved ones. And that can take many forms. For instance, if someone is diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, I'll help the family understand what that means and then work with the patient to have them to figure out what they're going to do. Are they going to decide to have treatment, or are they going to do something more holistically and live a better quality of life without chemo and radiation during that time? People go both ways. Some people want to do everything they can, and others want to just pull back and enjoy the rest of their life that they have without feeling sick all the time from the treatments.
Mhm.
And so we're guides to end of life is really what it is. Nobody's trained in this field. We don't do this well anymore. We used to take care of our family members when they were dying, and now we've turned it over to the medical community. And the medical community, they mean well, but constant treatment to the very end may not be what everyone wants. And so we offer an alternative to that. And it's a very rewarding field when you can actually get people to talk about what they want
Mhm.
at ends of life, how they see it happening, who they want with them. Do they want music played? I was interviewing a woman and I said, well, what kind of soft music would you like played during your last few days? And she said, if I ever had music, I would be so upset. She hates music. And so we would agitate her when she couldn't communicate. So, it's those kinds of things that I do as a doula to really understand where a person wants to be
Okay.
and how they want to get there. Yeah.
So do death doulas work with hospice care managers or just families? I mean, who would be the target audience that a death doula would I mean, I know the individual, but
Mhm.
you
What
know,
I do, well, because I'm a geriatric care manager, I work in conjunction with a lot of hospice nurses because I'm always making referrals for different kinds of care. I network a lot with them because if they have a situation where um, a family needs more guidance or the person needs more guidance, they'll refer to me. Some hospice agencies are bringing in doulas to accompany because what hospice is, it's very limited in terms of time. They're excellent at what they do, but they come in and they train the families how to take care of their loved one. They're not doing the work, the family is doing the work. So with help from a doula, we're able to keep reinforcing that training because they're stressed, they're not remembering everything,
yeah.
and they're afraid to do a lot of things like administer morphine or anything else
Right.
along those lines. So that's what we do. We're a stabilizing force for them in their world.
How would you say that they could, I mean, since you already do this, you're a geriatric care manager and you are also a death doula. How can you combine the practice? How would you
Uh,
suggest to others that they do this?
yeah, I would list it as one of the service offerings: end of life planning, end of life care. Uh, so many times I'm working with people who are on the decline. I work with a lot of folks with dementia, Alzheimer's, CHF, a lot of those different things. And I like to introduce hospice early on as a conversation so that people understand what it is, because the first thing they think is, no, I don't want anybody coming at me with a morphine needle and killing me. That's really what they think hospice is, and it's so far removed from that. It's the better educated people are as to what it involves, the easier it is for them to accept it. And with the training that I've had as a doula and end of life and the 5 stages of death and all of that, I like to introduce palliative care first. It's much easier for people to accept that than if I say, you really could have hospice care in here. And then everybody gives up and they don't want to do that. Palliative care is a much easier service to offer. But without this training that I've had, I don't think I'd be as good of a care manager as I am, because I recognize the symptoms. I recognize the signs of when the next level when the next level of care needs to be increased. I think I mentioned to you previously that I just had a client this week tell her husband, and their husband told us that she knows she's getting worse and she thinks she's dying and she's afraid.
Yeah.
He happened to comment on that to us, and right away I knew what to do. Start having that conversation with her to make her feel heard. Because they're afraid to tell their family members sometimes,
Right.
because they don't want to hurt them, and it's easier to do it with a third party. Yeah.
Right. So, in many ways it would be like, compare birth and death, that as a death doula, the transitions, like with birth, you go through stages. Okay. All right. So how can geriatric care managers get trained?
Okay, that's easy. There were trainers all across the United States and nothing connected them. A couple of years ago, the founders of several of them got together and formed this alliance called, National End of Life Doula Alliance. It's NEDA, and you can find them at www.nedalliance.org. On there, you can find doulas, you can find doula training. It's like Doula 101. It's everything you want to know all in one website.
Okay, and that's great. And I'm going to, in this webinar, you will see at the end that the name of that and the link. You'll send us the link. Great.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and my last question is there a charge for death doulas, or as you said, you make it part of your end of life care? How do you do that?
I do. I make it part of my offerings, and I charge the same for it as I would care management.
Oh, okay. Well, that really makes sense.
It does, because it is care management. It's just the end of life care management.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's really a wonderful part. I think it's a great addition to the services offered by geriatric care managers. It just works. It just leads into it, because so much of our work is end of life care.
Right, exactly. And, my husband would always say, you don't get out of life alive. And so, we who work in aging, inevitably, we're going to face that with our clients. Well, I am thrilled that you did this, and it's been really wonderful doing this interview. And thank you very much. And
thank you, Cathy. It was a pleasure.
Oh, it was a delight. And you're a delight too. Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, good night, good day, good day. Thank you. All right. Okay, so we're going to get into the questions, but I wanted to say the next webinar I'm going to do with Tasha Bouchamp, and it's on solo agers, the next generation of clients in the upper 10%, because solo agers, they don't have children to support. So they have more money than a lot of sort of middle class people in aging, and sometimes they're not middle class. So we're going to cover all these topics, Tasha and I, and it's going to be March 21st, and there are all the times, and you can just go to that link and sign up, and Tasha and I will be doing that presentation. So let's move on to questions.
Well, thank you, Cathy and Patti, for this very important discussion, very much needed discussion as well. Patti, if you don't mind, just go ahead and unmute yourself there. So there you go, beautiful. So you can address, I think most of these questions actually are for Patti, Cathy. So maybe you can
I
take a
said
little
that.
breather and
Said it.
yeah, exactly. I'm getting a lot of positive comments about how it's, much needed discussion, well done, and so on. So let me see here. We have a number of questions already. So let me go ahead and start over here at the chat. There's some of them in chat and some over in the Q&A section. So I'm going to start with the chat questions first here. Let me scroll up to the first ones. And you may have probably answered some of these questions already, so we don't have to spend a lot of time just repeating it. I think you probably were. Let me see. Okay, I already passed a few here. Okay, sorry about that. I should have had this ready. Okay, so this one, Cathy, this first one is for you. How does your operations manual differ from ALCA's form book? And this is from Heather.
The forms that I have are integrated into the forms for the services. My forms are different. They're, I have 15 services, and there are forms with each service. So in, say, move management, there are several assessments that go along with move management. Should they move at all? If they are going to move, all the variables. I mean, should where they're going to move have a swimming pool, lap pool? Do they want to be 15 minutes from their daughter? But near, and it's sort of like a dating app, but you're figuring out where they're going to, what's the ideal place. And then there's a form to, you give the family 3 final choices, and they go see them themselves. But before that, you actually go to the facility, whatever it is, or the house, and check it out. And so there's a whole assessment for assisted living and nursing homes. So, each service has its own, I mean, everything starts with a geriatric assessment, but each service has, caregiver assessment is a caregiver assessment. So that's the difference. These are very, very specific to services, and they cover probably all of the ALCA forms anyway. I mean, a GDS is always going to be there, MS, capacity, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how it's different. And it's different in that the manual, teaches. So it's step by step how you deliver these. It's not just a forms manual, it's how to deliver each individual service step by step from intake to closing the case.
So it's not just here's a form, it's more comprehensive in how to use it, when to use it, those types of things in those situations.
Right. It's a lot of policy too. I mean, you need tons of policies. First of all, you need a COVID policy. I know you think it's going away. It's not. So you need a COVID policy. You need a policy because many of care managers partner with, home care agencies. And so you need a policy to do that. You want the home care agency to do certain things for you to make them your partner because you want gold standard care. You need a policy. You need a lot of policies. I'm not going to go on and on, but it's a lot of policies that you need to have, and it's a policy book as well as a operations manual.
Form book, yeah. All right, thank you. And before I go on to the next question, Patti, is there a way folks can reach you? A website, an email address, something like that you can provide?
Sure. My website is Aging Care, capital P, capital S.com. And that stands for Aging Care Planning Solutions.com.
Okay, great, thank you. And this next question is for you. This is from Samantha. Is it possible to be a solo practitioner, geriatric care manager, to also offer death doula? I ask because it sounds though you need to be available as transitions naturally happen. Correct? Correct question mark. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, and that is a great question. For the most part, I have some assistants in my practice. I have another care manager that assists me. I do a lot on my own. The one thing that has to happen is when the person is at the end of their life, the patient is at the end of their life and the family wants you around, you have to be there. So either you can rearrange your calendar or you need to have somebody to help you out during it. You can't be in two places at once, although most families would like us to do that. But I do have assistants, but I have a full practice. I have a full practice. I can't just take off from all my clients at one time to be there during this special time for a client without some help.
Okay.
Do you think that answers your question?
Sounds good to me. Absolutely.
Okay.
And here's a sort of a follow-up question too, to what you just said. What options do families have if their hospice of choice has a death doula already on staff that the family does not care for or want and would prefer to work with someone else? And there's a couple of questions here. How are death doulas paid? What is their billing range? Do they bill by the hour or a flat fee?
I think that's up to the doula themselves. There are plenty of doulas that are not geriatric care managers. So they either do a flat fee for time, the way some of the birth doulas do it. I bill hourly because that's the structure of my business. And so it's the same rate that I would charge for care management services. If somebody doesn't want to work with a doula that they have at hospice, because the family would not be paying for that, Medicare pays for that. They always have the right to hire somebody independently. Where our services are not covered by Medicare, it is private pay only.
Okay. Next question for Patti. How does Patti introduce herself to family members? Do you start as an end-of-life doula, sometimes without being the care manager? In other words, I guess just come in as an end-of-life doula rather than both dual roles?
Not in my business. My business is being a geriatric care manager, and one of the services I offer are death doula services. So when I meet clients for the first time, we go over the list of services, and I do tell them that I am trained as a guide for end of life, and they're usually they like it. They like that there's somebody that can hold their hand, as particularly the family caregivers, of how to be there for their loved ones.
I can imagine
Yeah.
would be an excellent option to offer
It's
folks,
it's it's
especially at that time.
it's so overwhelming for the family caregiver when the person they love is dying and they don't necessarily have the skills to be able to manage the care. Hospice does a phenomenal job with controlling pain and being there for the family, but they are limited in time. And while hospice manages the care, the families actually do it. And that's what really goes on with hospice care.
To that point, how many of us, raise your hand if you have skills in death and dying? I mean, it only happens really, once in your own personal life, but it doesn't happen that often. So it's not like you get, unless you are a GCM and you're in that environment, it's very, very few of us that are around, doctors, nurses, of course, but that's a specialized area. I think 95%, 98% of the population is not involved really until it happens to them. And then you have to become an expert in that area quickly.
Right. And
Next
that's where the
question.
panic sets in, right?
Yeah, right. That's where all
Right.
the assistance is needed at that point in time. So, okay, this is from Stacy, and I do believe it's addressed to Patti again. How do you help the care partner overcome the morphine?
When I give talks in my community, I have a big sign showing a needle on it because people just think morphine is there to kill you, and it's so not accurate. First of all, the amount of morphine that is used in end of life is very tiny, and it is oral. It is a liquid form that goes inside someone's cheek. So you're not injecting people with needles at that point. Mostly it's used to keep the airways open so people don't struggle to breathe. It's a very old, well tried out drug, and it's nothing to fear. It actually helps people almost avoid that, what they call at the end, call that death rattle. That's the secretions that are building up. Morphine helps with that so that people are not struggling to breathe. It's all part of the comfort measures that are offered by hospice care.
Here's a question from Linda, and I think I'm going to go ahead and field this one. Can you put the link in chat? And but rather than do that, Cathy, if you can include that in your email with the copy, I believe she's talking about Patty's contact information there, so we can reach. You can just
Patti,
add that to.
Can you do that, Patty? Do you have access to the sharing screen?
You have to type it into the chat.
Into the chat.
It's the green button.
Yeah, but
We could just.
I
We could
wanted
just
to
do.
send it to everybody, right?
Yeah.
Everyone. Okay, there we go. I'll do that.
And so the links don't work. Will they be sent out? Yes, the links will be sent in
Yeah.
your copy of the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, they will. They will.
Mhm. And also the link to NEDA, the National End of Life Doula Alliance. Anyone who's interested in this field should really take a look at that website, which is nedalliance.org. It is such a beautiful site that has been put together where everything has been consolidated into one place.
Okay, thank you. And I can see where it's come up now, so I can see where thank you for Patty for doing that. There's more. I see Heather put something in here more about from Death Doulas. Check out this great panel interview. Just demystifying death doulas from North Carolina Serious Illness Coalition. Okay, folks can look at that here. I'm trying to get to that. There's some more questions here. I don't want to spend a lot of time just on. There we go. And there's Patty's contact information there. Here's a question here. Let me read through it real quick. See what's okay. Patti, it's to you again. I also heard that end of life doulas may also do home chores for the family, even clean in the house. Question mark, is that what you have heard?
That's a good question. Your role is to guide and to hold space for the family and for the patient. I'll do whatever somebody wants while I'm there. If they want me to wash the dishes in the sink, I have no objection to it. I'm going to do whatever it takes. One of the things that's very hard for people to do is people are always coming in and saying, what can I do? What can I do to help you? And when, the family caregiver is there, they're so preoccupied, they don't know what to tell people. So what I do is I have an exercise that I do with the family, and they write down chores that they would like to have done. Walk the dog, take out the garbage, empty the dishwasher, this and that, right? And I have them put it in a bowl on the kitchen counter. And when somebody comes and asks them, what can I do? All they have to do is say, just pick something out of the bowl. They don't have to think, it's already been done. And it's it really helps them. People want to help. They want to help, but if the person can't tell them what to do, then they can't help. So I encourage families and friends to really come and help, be with them. We've taken end of life, we've taken dying so far away from families by bringing it to the medical profession. Like I said before, it's take it back. You know, we've been doing it this way for thousands of years. It's only in the last century that we have given up our way of handling this. So it's time to take it back and be there for each other.
Thank you. Great, excellent suggestion. I like that. And it sort of breaks that tension too. What do I do? What do I say? Just, hey, I think I'll go ahead and get engaged in this. And there you're there for a little while and you get a comfort feel for what's going on and how they're doing.
Right.
Okay, here. Let's see. I think I saw a couple more. Yeah, take 3, 4 more questions. Okay, so let's see.
Keith,
Well,
Keith,
yeah,
can I say something about what Patti just said? You know, really what happened, you know, why you know, families used to be there with death and, you know, because they didn't trust hospitals. So they smelled death, they felt death when feeling their bodies, you know, they knew what death was. And then what happened was the federal government literally is the villain right here. They funded the whole nursing home movement. They built the buildings. And so what, I mean, if you remember, I don't know, you know, how old, but both sets of my grandparents were put in nursing homes post haste. There was no choice. So death, like Patty's saying, has been taken away from the family and it's been left remote. So they don't know what it is anymore. And the family themselves don't know, you know, ask the neighbors to help out. It's that basic. And it only changed in 1970 when community care started, because what the feds found out was it was costing them a fortune building all these nursing homes. So that's, you know, really what happened in, you know, in our society. And it's a lot of the problems that we have. So that's my 2 cents.
okay. So we have quite a few questions here, and if I don't get to everybody's question, please don't be offended. Go ahead and email Cathy and email Patti for your particular question there, because I see we are getting kind of low on time. Do you just want me to randomly choose a couple more, Cathy? Is that
Yeah, go for it.
acceptable?
And there's still a ton of people
Okay.
here.
And you've answered some of these already. What kind of training does a care manager need to become a death doula? You've already addressed that. Okay, what do you do, or what do you say or do when a person is dying, the person dying tells you that she is afraid?
Okay.
Well, any
So
of us really.
yeah, and that is very, you know, that happened last week with one of my clients. She's afraid. And so by spending the time and talking about it, what are you afraid of? You know, what does it mean to you? They won't have these frank conversations a lot of times with their family. They just don't. They know they're going to hurt them because they're leaving them. And a doula can be a great asset to alleviating some of that fear. Of course, nobody knows exactly what goes on wherever people go, right? We all have different beliefs. We all have a whatever we believe in, but we're there to help them decide what their beliefs are and to ease them into it. And so the more you talk about it, the less fear there is. I mean, that's why there's so many therapists in the world, because the more you talk about it, the less effect it has on you. And the same goes for dying. The more you talk about it, the less fear you will end up having.
Okay, let's see here. Let's do one more here. Let me look through here and see if there's okay, here's our, it's gonna be our last question here for this evening. And again, folks, if you didn't hear your or you weren't happy with the answer to your question, feel free to go ahead and email Cathy or Patti in the information that was provided there. For years, the state of Virginia, where I practice, this is from Barbie, where I practice, has not provided palliative care. Is this a right to all Medicare recipients? I recently heard a company here is going to start that, but as a GCM, is there anything I can do to help my clients receive palliative care?
Absolutely. The one thing how they can get it done is to keep asking for it. Because the more the general public asks for it, the more it would have to become available. And yes, it is a Medicare paid benefit. I know different
Absolutely, right,
states have different regulations, but ask for it, be vocal, ask for it.
I don't think it's the first time I've ever heard of a state not providing that. I've not heard that before. It's like interesting. Okay, well, that's going to be the end of our questions. You guys want to wrap anything up here or any last comments? Thank you again for a great webinar. And we have our next one coming up in March, I believe it was. Kathy, is that
Yes.
correct?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Well, I want to
Fantastic.
thank Patti. Patti is, just it's been a delight working with her on this, and she is, as you can see, a font of information and good vibes, as we say in California. And
Thank you very, very much. This is such a pleasure. I am so passionate about this. And I love talking about it. I think I mentioned it to you. I had a teacher from Toronto call me to teach a one-day class to her students on what does the death doula do. So
yeah.
I love doing it.
Yeah. And it's, like I said, if the Washington Post did a story the day that Patti and I decided to do this, then, there's good juju out there for it's coming to everyone.
It is. It's
That's
true.
right.
It's grown tremendously since when I started working in the field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you all. Thank you for attending. And if you have questions, like Keith said, send them in. And thank you very much for being here.